I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. The glossy travel brochure trembled in my hands as I traced the outline of the Colosseum with my fingertip. 67 years I'd waited for this moment, the chance to finally see Italy with my own eyes. My name is Ashley Green, and after 43 years of teaching high school English in Portland, Oregon, I was finally planning the trip of my dreams. "You're really doing it this time," Eleanor Thompson said, pouring us both another cup of tea at my kitchen table. She'd been my best friend for over 40 years, had seen me through my husband's death, my retirement, and countless family dramas. "Robert and I always said we'd go when he retired." I carefully placed a sticky note on a page showing the rolling hills of Tuscany. "Cancer had other plans." Eleanor nodded, understanding etched into the lines around her eyes. She'd lost her own husband 5 years before I lost Robert. "He'd want you to go. Ash, you've waited long enough." The travel brochure was worn at the edges from months of planning. 3 weeks in Italy, Rome, Florence, Venice, the Amalfi Coast, and several days in the Tuscan countryside. I'd been saving meticulously for 2 years, setting aside every extra dollar from my teacher's pension until I'd accumulated exactly $13,000, enough for the tour package I'd chosen plus spending money. September in Italy will be perfect. Melissa Carter, my travel agent, had assured me earlier that week as I'd made my final payment. Her enthusiasm had been contagious. "The weather will be warm but not scorching, and the tourist crowds will have thinned out. You picked the perfect time, Mrs. Green." I'd walked out of her office feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, excitement about the future. At 67, too many of my friends spoke only of the past. I was determined to create new memories, to prove to myself that widowhood didn't mean my life was over. "Have you told Christopher and Zoe about your plans?" Eleanor asked, bringing me back to the present. I nodded, gathering the brochures into a neat stack. "Last Sunday dinner, Christopher seemed happy for me, but Zoe—" I trailed off, unsure how to describe my daughter-in-law's reaction. "Let me guess. She gave you that tight little smile that doesn't reach her eyes." I laughed, despite myself. Eleanor had Zoe's number from the day they'd met at Christopher and Zoe's wedding 5 years ago. She said, and I quote, "That's a lot of money for one person to spend on a vacation. Wouldn't it be more practical to do something local?" Eleanor rolled her eyes. Practical coming from the woman who spent $3,000 on a handbag last month. "How do you know that?" "Facebook." She posted 3 different angles of it with the caption, "Sometimes you have to treat yourself." The irony is apparently lost on her. I sighed, gazing out the kitchen window at my modest backyard. The roses Robert had planted were blooming, their fragrance drifting through the open window. Christopher works so hard to maintain their lifestyle. He's always been responsible, even as a little boy. Remember how he used to save his allowance when the other kids spent theirs immediately, and now he's married to a woman who treats his credit card like it's unlimited. Eleanor's voice softened. "You raised a good man, Ash. I just wish he hadn't married someone who sees his mother as competition for resources." I wanted to defend Zoe. She could be charming and thoughtful when she wanted to be, but the evidence of her true nature had been accumulating for years. The comments about my outdated clothes when I visited their home, the way she'd roll her eyes when I mentioned financial concerns, the not-so-subtle hints that I should consider selling my house because it's so much work for someone your age. But Christopher loved her, and I loved my son. So I smiled and nodded and pretended not to notice when Zoe checked her phone during our conversations, or changed the subject whenever I mentioned my upcoming trip to Italy. "Maybe she's just worried about me traveling alone at my age," I offered, though I didn't believe it myself. "Maybe," Eleanor said, clearly unconvinced. "Or maybe she's wondering why that money isn't going into her pocket instead." I changed the subject, but Eleanor's words lingered in my mind long after she'd left. The signs had been there all along. If I'd been willing to see them, the casual comments about my fixed income, the suggestions that I was being reckless with my finances, the way Zoe's eyes would narrow whenever I mentioned a purchase I'd made for myself. Robert had been a careful man who'd left me comfortable, but not wealthy. The Italy trip would take a significant chunk of my discretionary savings, but I'd planned it that way. This wasn't an impulse decision. It was the culmination of years of dreaming and months of careful budgeting. That night, I took out the final itinerary Melissa had prepared and spread it across my kitchen table like a treasure map. Rome, Florence, the Amalfi Coast, Tuscany's rolling hills. I would see it all. I'd even bought a new camera, something Robert would have teased me about since I'd always claimed his old Nikon was perfectly adequate. As I traced the route we'd take through Italy, I felt a sense of anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. This trip wasn't just about sightseeing. It was about proving to myself that I could still have adventures, that being widowed and retired didn't mean my life was over. I fell asleep that night with the Italy guidebook on my nightstand, dreaming of sunlight on ancient stones and the taste of real Italian gelato. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks later. I was weeding my garden when Christopher's car pulled into my driveway unexpectedly. My son rarely visited without calling first, and never on a Tuesday morning when he should have been at work. Christopher, I shaded my eyes against the morning sun. Is everything all right? He emerged from his car looking tired, the lines around his eyes more pronounced than usual. At 36, my son had always projected an air of calm capability, but today he seemed frayed around the edges. Just thought I'd stop by on my way to the office, he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Haven't seen you since Sunday dinner. I brushed the dirt from my gardening gloves. Come in. I'll make coffee. In the kitchen, Christopher fidgeted with his watch as I prepared the coffee pot. Something was clearly on his mind, but I'd learned long ago that pushing my son only made him retreat further. He'd talk when he was ready. How's Zoe? I asked, setting a mug in front of him. She's fine. Too quick, too dismissive. Work's keeping her busy. That promotion came with a lot more responsibility. I nodded, remembering how proud Zoe had been 6 months ago when she'd been promoted to senior marketing manager at her firm. The increase in salary had apparently not been enough to satisfy their lifestyle. However, as Christopher had mentioned, working overtime more frequently in recent months. And how are you? I studied my son's face, noting the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. Christopher sipped his coffee, avoiding my gaze. I'm fine, Mom. Just the usual work stress. Christopher. I reached across the table to touch his hand. You've never been a good liar, not even as a child. What's really going on? He sighed, shoulders slumping. It's nothing serious. Just some financial stuff we're sorting through. Zoe's car needed major repairs last month, and then the property taxes were higher than we expected. My heart sank. This wasn't the first time Christopher had hinted at financial difficulties, though he was always vague about the details. In the past year, there had been multiple unexpected expenses, home repairs, medical bills for Zoe that insurance somehow wouldn't cover, car problems that couldn't wait. Do you need help? I asked gently. Christopher straightened, pride flashing in his eyes. No, Mom, we're fine. I just wanted to check on you. That's all. But as he was leaving, he paused at the door. You're still planning that Italy trip for September? Yes, I said, suddenly wary. Everything's booked and paid for. He nodded, a strange expression crossing his face. That's good. You deserve it after all these years. Something in his tone made me uneasy, but I brushed it aside. Christopher had always supported my dreams, even when Zoe was less enthusiastic. If he seemed distracted today, it was probably just work stress, as he'd said. After he left, I called Eleanor. He was asking about the Italy trip, I told her, still troubled by Christopher's strange behavior. And, Eleanor's voice was sharp with suspicion. And nothing. He just asked if I was still going. Ashley, I love you, but sometimes you're too trusting. That boy has financial troubles written all over him, and his wife has expensive taste. Do the math. I sighed, unwilling to believe my son would see my savings as a solution to his problems. Christopher wouldn't ask me to cancel my trip to bail them out. He knows how long I've been planning this. Maybe, Eleanor conceded. But what about Zoe? You really think she values your dream vacation over her lifestyle? After we hung up, I found myself staring at the Italy brochures still arranged neatly on my coffee table. Christopher had been such a thoughtful child, always putting others first. When he was 10, he'd saved his allowance for months to buy me a silver bracelet for Christmas. When Robert was sick, Christopher had driven 3 hours every weekend to visit, help with household chores, and give me a break from caregiving. But marriage to Zoe had changed him in subtle ways. He called less frequently, seemed more stressed, more distant. Their lifestyle, the luxury car, the designer clothes, the expensive vacations, seemed at odds with the careful, frugal boy I'd raised. I tried to recall exactly when I'd first noticed the change in Zoe's attitude toward me. Perhaps it was the day I'd mentioned my plans to use part of Robert's life insurance to fund the Italy trip. She'd been visibly surprised, then quickly masked it with a tight smile. "I just assumed you'd be saving that money," she'd said, her tone carefully neutral. "You know, for later. For them to inherit," she meant. The realization sent a chill through me now as I considered Eleanor's warning. Was it possible that Zoe, perhaps even Christopher, saw my savings as their future windfall, money I was merely holding for them temporarily? The thought was too painful to dwell on. I pushed it aside and returned to my gardening, losing myself in the simple pleasure of nurturing growing things. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and like the persistent weeds in my garden, it would prove difficult to remove. That night, I dreamed of Italy again. But this time the dream had an uneasy quality. I was walking through ancient ruins, but someone was following me, just out of sight. When I turned to look, they vanished into shadows. I woke feeling unsettled, the remnants of the dream clinging to me like cobwebs. The phone call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning 3 days later. I was reviewing my Italy packing list, making notes about comfortable walking shoes and lightweight clothing. When my cell phone rang, Christopher's name flashed on the screen. "Christopher, is everything okay?" It was 10:30 a.m. He should have been at work. "Mom!" His voice was shaking, panic evident even through the phone. "I need your help. Zoe's in serious trouble." My maternal instincts kicked in immediately, pushing aside the nagging doubts that had been growing since his visit. "What kind of trouble is she hurt?" "No, not physically." He paused, and I could hear him taking a deep breath. "She owes money to some very dangerous people. Gambling debts." The words hit me like a physical blow. Gambling Zoe. In all the years I'd known her, I'd never heard her mention gambling beyond the occasional lottery ticket. "It started small," Christopher explained, his voice uneven. "Online poker, sports betting. She said it was just for fun, blowing off steam after work stress. But then she started losing, and instead of stopping, she kept trying to win back what she'd lost." I sat down heavily at my kitchen table, struggling to process this revelation. "How much does she owe?" "Christopher." A long pause. $13,000. The exact amount I'd saved for Italy. The coincidence seemed too perfect, too calculated. But the terror in Christopher's voice seemed genuine. My son had never been a good actor. "Mom, I know it's a lot," he continued when I didn't respond. "But these people, they're not playing games. They showed up at our house yesterday. Zoe's been hiding in our bedroom ever since." Images flashed through my mind. Zoe terrified. Dangerous men threatening my family. Christopher helpless to protect his wife. The thought of my daughter-in-law in danger, regardless of our complicated relationship, was unbearable. "Christopher, have you gone to the police? And tell them that my wife owes money to loan sharks. They'll just say it's a civil matter until someone gets hurt." His voice broke. "Mom, I'm scared. Really scared." The sound of my strong, capable son reduced to tears broke something in me. This was my child, my baby boy who used to run to me with skinned knees and nightmares. If he needed me now, how could I refuse? "Okay," I heard myself saying. "Okay, we'll figure this out. How did Zoe even get involved with these people?" A coworker introduced her to an online poker site. Christopher's explanation came quickly, perhaps too quickly. She thought it was legitimate at first. By the time she realized who was really running it, she was already in too deep. I tried to reconcile this with the Zoe I knew. Image conscious, always in control, obsessed with appearances. Gambling seemed out of character, but then again, People often hid their addictions well. And Zoe had always been impulsive when stressed, prone to shopping sprees and spontaneous purchases. The guys who came to the house yesterday weren't exactly subtle, Christopher continued. They made it very clear what would happen if Zoe doesn't pay by Friday. His voice caught. Mom, I can't lose her. The desperation in his voice sealed my fate. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about protecting my family. The Italy trip suddenly seemed selfish, frivolous compared to my daughter-in-law's safety. I could always take another vacation, but I couldn't replace Zoe if something happened to her. I have some money set aside, I said slowly. The money I'd saved for my trip. I can't ask you to give up Italy for us. But he wasn't really protesting, was he? If he'd truly been against taking my vacation money, he would have refused outright, found another solution. Instead, he waited in silence while I talked myself into sacrificing my dream for their crisis. Family comes first, Christopher. Italy will still be there next year. The words felt hollow as I spoke them, but also right. Wasn't this what mothers did, sacrifice for their children, Mom? You're saving our lives. Christopher's relief was palpable. I swear we'll pay you back as soon as possible. With interest. Of course they would. Christopher was a good man, raised with strong values. He understood the magnitude of what I was giving up. This was just a temporary emergency, a one-time crisis that required extraordinary measures. I should have demanded proof, photographs of these threatening men, documentation of the debt, something tangible beyond my son's panicked phone call. But I was too busy being the mother he needed me to be, too focused on playing my role in their drama to ask the hard questions. I'll transfer the money today, I promised. But Christopher, Zoe needs to get help for this gambling problem. This can't happen again. Absolutely, he agreed quickly. We've already looked into counseling programs. She's going to get the help she needs. Such reasonable words, such sensible plans. My son sounded like he had everything under control except for this one unfortunate situation. I felt proud of him for handling the crisis so maturely, for protecting his wife while also taking steps to prevent future problems. I hung up feeling like a hero, the good mother who'd stepped up when her family needed her most. Sure, I'd have to postpone my Italian adventure. But wasn't sacrifice what love was all about? Robert would have done the same thing if he'd been alive. Within an hour, I transferred $13,000 to Christopher's account and called Melissa, the travel agent, to cancel my trip. The cancellation fees were substantial, but compared to Zoe's safety, they seemed meaningless. I spent the rest of the day feeling righteously satisfied with my decision. When Eleanor called that evening, I told her about the family emergency with the gravity of someone who'd averted a disaster. Gambling debts. Eleanor's skepticism came through clearly. Since when does Zoe gamble? Apparently it started small and got out of hand, I explained. It happens to more people than you'd think. And these debt collectors just happened to demand exactly the amount you had saved for Italy. Eleanor's voice was flat with disbelief. Eleanor, I know what you're thinking, but Christopher was genuinely terrified. You should have heard his voice. If you say so, honey. I just hope those two appreciate what you've given up for them. I was sure they would. How could they not? I'd literally saved Zoe's life and preserved their marriage. They'd probably spend the rest of their lives grateful for my sacrifice. The thank you text from Christopher came 3 hours after I'd transferred the money. Mom, you're an angel. Zoe's safe now. We love you so much. Short, sweet, and exactly what I needed to hear. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe normally. My family was safe, and I'd been the one to protect them. I placed the Italy guidebooks on the top shelf of my bookcase, out of sight but not completely gone. Maybe next year, I told myself, or the year after. Italy had stood for thousands of years. It would wait for me a little longer. The first cracks in their story appeared 4 days later when I tried to call Christopher to check how they were handling the aftermath of their crisis. His phone went straight to voicemail. I tried Zoe's number with the same result. By Friday afternoon, worry had replaced my initial satisfaction. What if the debt collectors had returned? What if $13,000 hadn't been enough? I drove past their house. Noting with unease that both cars were gone, and the newspapers were piling up on the front porch. Saturday morning brought a text from Christopher, taking Zoe away for a few days to help her decompress from the stress. Thanks again for everything. Mom, you saved our marriage. A few days away sounded therapeutic. Zoe had been through a traumatic experience, and Christopher was being a supportive husband by helping her recover somewhere peaceful. I felt a warm glow of satisfaction thinking about how my sacrifice had made their healing possible. When Eleanor stopped by with homemade soup that evening, I showed her Christopher's message. How thoughtful of him to take his traumatized wife on vacation while you sit at home having canceled your dream trip, Eleanor remarked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. It's not a vacation, I protested. It's recovery time. Zoe's been through a terrible ordeal. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. And where exactly are they recovering? Did Christopher mention that? He hadn't. I realized the text had been vague about their destination. But why would that matter? They needed time to heal, to process what had happened, to strengthen their marriage after such a crisis. You're being too suspicious, I told Eleanor. They'll call when they're ready. But by Monday, with still no phone calls and no updates on Zoe's recovery or their plans for getting counseling, even I was beginning to feel uneasy. I drove past their house again and noticed the lawn sprinkler system wasn't running on its regular schedule. That was unlike Christopher, who was usually meticulous about home maintenance. Tuesday afternoon, I broke down and called Christopher's office. His assistant sounded surprised to hear from me. Oh, Mrs. Green? Didn't Christopher tell you he took 2 weeks of vacation time? Said it was a last-minute family situation. 2 weeks Christopher had never taken 2 consecutive weeks off work in his entire career. He checked emails from his sickbed during the flu. Something about this extended absence didn't add up. Did he mention where they were going? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Not specifically, but he seemed excited about it. Said something about it being a once-in-a-lifetime trip. A once-in-a-lifetime trip. The phrase hit me like a slap. That's exactly how I'd described Italy to anyone who would listen. My once-in-a-lifetime trip that I'd sacrificed to save Zoe from imaginary debt collectors. I drove straight to Eleanor's house, probably breaking several traffic laws in the process. She took one look at my face and poured me a glass of wine without asking what was wrong. They're gone, I said without preamble. Christopher took 2 weeks off work for a once-in-a-lifetime trip that he never mentioned to me. Eleanor set down her own glass. Gone where? I don't know. But it's starting to feel like they used my money for their own vacation, while I'm sitting here worried about Zoe's gambling debts that probably never existed. Oh, honey. Eleanor's expression was a mixture of sympathy and anger. What are you going to do? I'm going to find out exactly where they went and what they did with my money. Eleanor pulled out her laptop. Start with social media. Zoe can't go 10 minutes without posting something. She was right. Zoe's Instagram was set to private, but her Facebook page was public. I rarely checked it, preferring phone calls or in-person visits to social media updates. Now I regretted my old-fashioned communication preferences. The photos appeared on my screen, each one delivering a fresh blow to my trust. Zoe, radiant in a flowing white sundress, standing at the bow of a cruise ship with the Mediterranean sparkling behind her. The caption read, Day 1 of our dream cruise. Couldn't be more grateful for this amazing surprise. My hands shook as I scrolled through more images. Christopher feeding Zoe chocolate-covered strawberries by the pool. Zoe posing with a champagne flute against a sunset that could only be the Greek islands. Christopher in a tuxedo at what looked like a formal dinner, grinning like he'd won the lottery, which I supposed he had. $13,000 of my carefully saved Italy money had bought them a luxury Mediterranean cruise, the same cruise I'd looked at months ago and dismissed as too expensive for my budget. They were literally living my dream vacation while I sat in my kitchen in Portland, staring at empty savings accounts and feeling like the world's biggest fool. The worst part was Zoe's obvious joy in every photo. This wasn't a woman recovering from trauma or dealing with dangerous debt collectors. This was a woman celebrating what she clearly considered the coup of her lifetime. I can't believe they would do this, I whispered, still scrolling through the evidence of their betrayal. My own son. Eleanor placed a hand over mine, stopping the painful procession of images. People show you who they are, Ashley. It's up to you whether you believe them. I scrolled back through Zoe's posts from the past month, looking for any hint of the gambling problem that had supposedly threatened her life. Nothing. No mentions of poker nights, no sports betting references, no signs of the stress and fear that Christopher had described so convincingly. Just the usual stream of restaurant meals, shopping trips, and complaints about being bored at work. How could I have been so stupid? I asked, the humiliation burning worse than the betrayal. You weren't stupid, Eleanor said firmly. You were being a mother. They counted on that. My phone rang, displaying an unknown number. I answered mechanically. Mrs. Green, this is Capital One Fraud Prevention. We're calling to verify some unusual charges on your credit card. I listened in growing horror as the representative listed transactions I'd never authorized. Airline tickets to Miami, cruise excursion packages, travel insurance, ship-to-shore Wi-Fi packages. All dated from the week before Christopher's panicked call about Zoe's supposed gambling debts. They hadn't just stolen my Italy money. They'd used my credit card to enhance their stolen vacation, adding expensive excursions and upgrades while I sat at home worrying about Zoe's safety. I didn't make those purchases, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. We suspected as much, the representative replied. The spending pattern is inconsistent with your history. We'll cancel this card immediately and issue you a new one. After I hung up, Eleanor poured me another glass of wine. Well, they charged over $4,000 on my emergency credit card, I said, still stunned by the scope of their deception. For cruise upgrades and excursions. Eleanor's face hardened. That's not just taking advantage of your generosity. Ashley, that's theft. Plain and simple. The timeline was becoming sickeningly clear. Christopher and Zoe had planned this cruise for weeks, maybe months. The gambling debt story was just a cover to extract the cash they needed for the basic cruise package. Then they'd used my credit card information to add the luxury touches that would make their stolen vacation even more special. How did they get my credit card information? I wondered aloud. I never share that with anyone. Eleanor frowned, thinking, when was the last time someone else handled your card? I cast my mind back, trying to remember. Christmas. Maybe we went to that expensive restaurant downtown, and Zoe offered to help pay for dinner. A memory surfaced. She took my card to the register while I was in the restroom. There you go, Eleanor said grimly. She probably took photos of both sides of your card, got all your information in one go. It made horrible sense. Christopher had helped me organize my finances after Robert died, so he already knew about my bank accounts and savings. But the credit card I kept for emergencies was one I rarely used and never discussed with him. Zoe had seen an opportunity and seized it. I called my bank next, sick with dread about what else they might have accessed. Sure enough, the checking account showed 2 unauthorized transfers in the past month, both to online gambling sites. Small amounts, just a few hundred each, but the pattern was clear. They'd been testing my security, seeing how long it would take me to notice unusual activity. When I didn't catch the gambling charges, they'd felt confident enough to go for the big score. They created a paper trail, I realized. Horror dawning. If I ever got suspicious about the gambling story, they could show me my own bank statements as proof that Zoe had a gambling problem. Eleanor's face reflected the disgust I felt. That's not just calculated. Ashley, that's sociopathic. The boy I'd raised to value honesty and integrity had become a man who would steal from his own mother, lie to her face, and document his theft on social media for the world to see. The pain of that realization was almost unbearable. What do I do now? I asked, feeling lost and betrayed in a way I hadn't since Robert's diagnosis. First, you secure what's left of your finances, Eleanor said practically. Change all passwords, freeze your credit, alert your bank to watch for suspicious activity. Then you wait for them to come home and confront them with what you know. I nodded, feeling a cold determination replace the shock and hurt. And then, Eleanor's smile was grim. And then you show them exactly who they're dealing with. The real Ashley Green, not the sweet, gullible old lady they thought they could steal from with impunity. For the first time since discovering their betrayal, I felt a glimmer of power returning. They'd made a crucial mistake. Christopher and Zoe. They'd underestimated me, assumed that my love for them made me weak and exploitable. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "They've stolen my dream," I said quietly. "But they will not steal my dignity or my future." Eleanor raised her glass in a toast. "To consequences." I clinked my glass against hers. "To consequences." That night, as I secured my remaining finances and changed every password I possessed, I kept returning to the photos of Christopher and Zoe living it up in the Mediterranean. The son I'd raised and the woman he'd chosen to marry, celebrating their successful con with champagne and selfies. They thought this story was over, that they'd won. They had no idea it was just beginning. I spent the next 3 days in a strange emotional limbo, hovering between disbelief, rage, and a cold, calculating determination that surprised even me. The realization that my own son had orchestrated such an elaborate deception left me feeling hollow, as if someone had scooped out my insides and replaced them with lead. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those cruise photos, Zoe's radiant smile as she posed on deck, Christopher's relaxed expression as he toasted the camera with champagne. They looked so happy in their betrayal, happy with my stolen money, happy while I sat alone in Portland, mourning the loss of my dream vacation and worrying about their safety. "We need proof," Eleanor said on Thursday morning, setting a cup of coffee in front of me. She'd been stopping by daily since we'd discovered the truth, bringing food I couldn't taste and practical advice I desperately needed. Not just for confronting them, but to protect yourself legally if it comes to that. I nodded, gathering the evidence I'd already collected, credit card statements, bank records, and printed screenshots from Zoe's Facebook page. It seemed damning to me, but would it be enough? "I need to know exactly when they're coming back," I said, scrolling through Zoe's latest cruise updates. "And I need to understand the full scope of what they've done." Eleanor's neighbor James Wilson, a retired police officer, had agreed to help us navigate the murky waters of financial fraud. He arrived at noon, his weathered face serious as he reviewed my documents. "This isn't just taking advantage of your generosity, Mrs. Green," he said, echoing Eleanor's assessment. "This is textbook fraud, using deception to obtain money, unauthorized use of your credit card. These are criminal offenses." The word criminal sent a chill through me. My son, a criminal. The boy who'd once returned a wallet he'd found with $50 inside, who'd spent hours helping elderly neighbors with yard work, was now someone who could be described as a criminal. "What are my options?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain steady. James leaned forward, his expression compassionate but firm. "You can file a police report, press charges for fraud and theft, or you can handle this privately, but that would mean giving up the possibility of legal recourse." "I don't want Christopher to go to jail," I said quietly. The thought of my only child behind bars was unbearable, regardless of what he'd done. "I just want my money back, and for them to understand that they can't treat me this way." James nodded. "Then we focus on building leverage for a private resolution. First, we need more information about their timeline and exactly how much they've taken." Eleanor's grandson, a tech-savvy college student named Tyler, helped us dig deeper into Zoe's social media activity. What we found made my blood run cold. "Look at this post from 6 weeks ago," Tyler said, pointing to Zoe's Instagram account that Eleanor had managed to access. "Thinking about Mediterranean blues and sunset views. Hashtag soon come true. Secret plans. 6 weeks ago, long before Christopher's panicked call about gambling debts. They'd been planning this cruise for at least that long, maybe longer. And here's a comment from Christopher on that post," Tyler continued. "Can't wait to surprise you with this. Worth every penny. Every penny of my money," I thought bitterly. "Check this out," Tyler said, opening another tab. "I found their cruise booking through their email confirmation. It's a 12-day Mediterranean cruise on Royal Caribbean, departing from Miami. According to this, they return to port this Saturday morning. Saturday. Just 2 days away." My heart began to pound as the reality sank in. In 48 hours, I would be face to face with my son and the woman who had helped him steal my dream. "There's more," Tyler said, his young face troubled. "I found their flight information too. They fly back to Portland on Sunday afternoon, arriving at 5:30 p.m. Sunday evening. They would walk through their front door Sunday night, probably still glowing from their stolen vacation, expecting business as usual. They had no idea I'd spent the week uncovering every detail of their betrayal. "What do you want to do, Ashley?" Eleanor asked softly. I stared at the evidence spread across my kitchen table, the timeline of their deception, the paper trail of their theft, the smiling photos that now seemed like mockery. "I'm going to confront them," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "But not immediately, not when they first get home. I want them to feel safe first, to think they've gotten away with it." James nodded approvingly. "Psychological advantage. Let them relax, maybe even start to feel a little guilty, then present your case when they're least expecting it." "I need to prepare," I said, already making mental notes. "I need to know exactly what I'm going to say, what I want from them, and what consequences I'm prepared to enforce if they don't comply." Eleanor squeezed my hand. "And you need to prepare emotionally, too. Ash, this won't be easy. They'll deny, deflect, try to make you feel guilty for accusing them. Christopher knows which buttons to push to manipulate you." She was right. My son knew my vulnerabilities, my fears, my desperate desire to be needed and loved by my only child. He'd used that knowledge against me once. He would certainly try again. "I won't let him manipulate me this time," I promised, though uncertainty gnawed at my resolve. Could I really stand firm against my own child, the boy I'd nursed through chickenpox and nightmares, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged and whose tears I'd dried? "We'll be with you," Eleanor promised. Every step of the way. As James and Tyler left, each promising to help in their own way, I felt something shift inside me. The paralyzing shock was giving way to a steady, burning determination. These people, yes, even my own son, had shown me exactly who they were. Now it was time to show them exactly who I was. Not just Ashley Green, the retired English teacher, not just Christopher's mother or Robert's widow, but a woman of strength and dignity who would not be exploited or deceived, not even by those she loved most. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, carefully outlining my approach. I needed to be strategic, not emotional, clear about what had happened, what I wanted, and what I was prepared to do if my demands weren't met. By morning, I had a plan. And for the first time since discovering Christopher and Zoe's betrayal, I slept soundly, free from the nightmares that had plagued me all week. Friday morning brought another revelation, this one perhaps the most disturbing yet. I'd been methodically checking all my financial accounts when I noticed something odd about my retirement fund. A failed login attempt from an unfamiliar IP address 3 days after Christopher and Zoe had left on their cruise. "They tried to access my retirement account from the ship," I told Eleanor, my hands shaking as I showed her the security alert email. "They stole $13,000 from me, charged another $4,000 to my credit card, and they were still trying to get more." Eleanor's face darkened with anger. "They're not just opportunistic thieves, they're predatory." The evidence of their calculation was mounting. This wasn't a desperate son making a poor choice in a moment of crisis. This was a systematic attempt to drain my finances by someone who'd studied my habits and deliberately exploited them. I called the investment company immediately and placed additional security measures on the account: a verbal password, 2-factor authentication, and a complete freeze on withdrawals or transfers without in-person verification. "Mrs. Green," said the security specialist I spoke with, "I strongly recommend you consider filing a police report. These attempts to access your accounts from outside the country are serious." I promised to consider it, though my heart still rebelled at the thought of seeing Christopher arrested. Despite everything, he was my son. But with each new discovery, my maternal instinct to protect him was being overwhelmed by the need to protect myself. James Wilson stopped by that afternoon with more information he'd gathered through his contacts. "I checked with a buddy at the cruise line," he said, settling at my kitchen table. "Your son and daughter-in-law booked this cruise 3 months ago, with a substantial deposit paid on March 15th. 3 months, while I was finalizing my Italy plans, excitedly sharing details with Christopher over Sunday dinner, He and Zoe were already plotting to steal my trip from me. The initial deposit was $3,000, James continued, consulting his notes. Paid with a credit card in Christopher's name. The remaining balance, $9,745, was paid on the day he called you about Zoe's supposed gambling debts. The timing was damning. Christopher had transferred my money directly to the cruise line, probably while I was still reeling from his fabricated crisis. What about the gambling transactions I found on my bank statement? I asked. James's expression was grim. Those were definitely created to establish a false narrative. Small amounts, spread out over several weeks, all to different online gambling sites. Classic setup for a long con. A long con. The phrase felt like a slap. My son hadn't just lied impulsively. He'd constructed an elaborate deception over months, laying groundwork, creating false evidence, all to steal from his own mother. There's one more thing, James said hesitantly. I had Tyler check their social media history more thoroughly. It seems this isn't the first time they've done something like this. He handed me a printout of an old Facebook post from Zoe's cousin. Thanks for the emergency loan that somehow turned into your Cabo vacation. Still waiting for that repayment you promised. #Family Matters. #Still waiting. The post was dated 2 years ago, with several sympathetic comments from mutual friends who'd apparently experienced similar treatment. They've done this before, I whispered, the realization sinking in. 2 other family members. It looks that way, James confirmed, which means they're unlikely to stop unless there are serious consequences. Eleanor, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. Ashley, I know you don't want to involve the police, but these people, yes, including your son, have shown a pattern of predatory behavior toward family members. They're financial abusers, plain and simple. The term hit me hard. Financial abuse. I'd read about it in relation to elderly parents being exploited by caregivers or family members, but I'd never imagined it would apply to my situation. I wasn't elderly or incapacitated. I was an independent, capable woman who happened to love her son enough to believe his lies. What should I do? I asked. The question directed as much to myself as to my friends. You need legal advice, Eleanor said firmly. My nephew Daniel is an attorney. He specializes in elder law and financial abuse cases. Let me call him. 2 hours later, Daniel Thompson sat in my living room, his youthful face serious as he reviewed the evidence we'd gathered. Despite being only in his mid-30s, he projected an air of competence and compassion that immediately put me at ease. Mrs. Green, what Christopher and Zoe have done constitutes elder financial exploitation under Oregon law, he explained. The fact that they created a fictitious emergency to extract money from you, used your credit card without permission, and attempted to access your retirement accounts. These are all serious offenses. But I'm not elderly, I protested weakly. I'm only 67. Daniel smiled gently. The law defines elderly differently than you might. In many states, including Oregon, anyone over 65 is considered an elder for purposes of financial abuse statutes. These laws exist precisely to protect people like you from exploitation by family members or caregivers. The validation that what had happened to me was not just morally wrong, but legally actionable, gave me a strange sense of relief. This wasn't just family drama. It was a crime with a name and legal remedies. What are my options? I asked, straightening in my chair. You have several, Daniel replied. You can file a police report and press criminal charges for theft, fraud, and elder financial abuse. The evidence you've gathered would make for a strong case. I flinched at the thought. And if I don't want Christopher to have a criminal record, then we can pursue a civil remedy, Daniel continued. We draft a legally binding agreement requiring full repayment of all stolen funds, plus interest and legal fees. We can include provisions about future contact, additional security measures for your finances, and consequences for non-compliance. What kind of consequences? If they fail to meet the terms of the agreement, you would reserve the right to pursue criminal charges retroactively. We would also include a provision allowing you to place a lien against their home or other assets if they default on payments. It sounded reasonable, fair even. They would repay what they stole, and I would give them the chance to avoid criminal prosecution. But something still troubled me. What's to stop them from doing this again? To me or to someone else? Daniel leaned forward, his expression serious. That's a valid concern. Mrs. Green, financial predators rarely stop with one victim. But there are ways to protect yourself. We can help you set up financial safeguards, changing accounts, establishing trusts, creating powers of attorney that designate someone trustworthy to manage your affairs if needed. What about my will? I asked, the thought occurring suddenly. Currently, everything goes to Christopher. Eleanor, who had been listening quietly, inhaled sharply. Oh, Ashley, you need to change that immediately. Daniel nodded agreement. Given the circumstances, I would strongly recommend revising your estate plan. We can discuss options that would allow you to provide for any grandchildren or other relatives while limiting Christopher's access to your assets. The conversation continued for another hour, with Daniel outlining various legal strategies and security measures I could implement. By the time he left, promising to draft documents for my review, I had a clearer sense of how to proceed. That night, alone in my kitchen, I found myself looking at old photographs of Christopher as a child. His gap-toothed smile in his second-grade school picture, the proud grin as he held up his first catch from a fishing trip with Robert, the solemn expression as he headed off to his senior prom, so grown up in his rented tuxedo. Where had that boy gone? How had he transformed into someone who could lie to my face, steal my dreams, and try to drain my retirement savings? Had the seeds of this betrayal always been there? Or had Zoe's influence corrupted him beyond recognition? I couldn't answer those questions. But I knew one thing with certainty. The time for blind maternal love had passed. From now on, my relationship with Christopher would be governed by clear boundaries, legal protections, and the understanding that trust, once broken, must be earned back through actions, not words or promises. As I put away the photographs, I felt a strange mixture of grief and resolve. I was mourning the son I thought I had, but I was also preparing to face the son who actually existed, a man capable of calculated deception and theft from his own mother. Sunday was approaching quickly. Soon, Christopher and Zoe would return from their stolen vacation, expecting to slip back into their normal lives with no consequences for what they'd done. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Saturday dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect Portland summer day that usually lifted my spirits. But as I sat at my kitchen table, reviewing the legal documents Daniel had prepared, sunshine seemed like an inappropriate backdrop for the storm I was about to unleash. Daniel had worked quickly, delivering a comprehensive package that included a promissory note for the full amount Christopher and Zoe had stolen, $17,437 plus interest. A revised will that established a trust for future grandchildren while significantly limiting Christopher's inheritance, and a power of attorney designating Eleanor as my financial agent should I become incapacitated. These are ready to be signed and notarized, he explained, pointing out the signature lines. But I recommend waiting until after your confrontation with Christopher and Zoe. Their reaction will tell you a lot about how to proceed. Eleanor arrived mid-morning with coffee and determination. Today's the day they dock in Miami, she reminded me. Are you ready for tomorrow? As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, showing her the documents Daniel had prepared. I keep going back and forth about how to approach them. Part of me wants to call the police and let them handle it. Another part still hopes Christopher will show genuine remorse. Eleanor's skepticism was evident in her raised eyebrow. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. That's why we have all this documentation and legal backup. James Wilson called around noon with an update. According to my contact at the cruise line, your son and daughter-in-law disembarked in Miami at 7:30 this morning. Their flight to Portland is scheduled for tomorrow at 11:45 a.m. Eastern Time, arriving at PDX at 5:30 p.m. our time. The timeline was becoming concrete. In just over 24 hours, I would be face to face with the architects of my betrayal. Are you absolutely sure you want to confront them alone? Eleanor asked for the third time. James and I could be with you, or at least nearby. I shook my head. This needs to be between Christopher, Zoe, and me. But I'll have my phone ready to call you immediately if things go sideways. We spent the afternoon reviewing our strategy, when to approach them not immediately after they arrived home, but after they'd had time to settle in, what evidence to present first the credit card statements, followed by the cruise booking confirmation, and how to respond to various potential reactions: denial, anger, tears, blame shifting. Remember, Eleanor cautioned, they're going to try to make you feel guilty for investigating them. They'll say you violated their privacy, that you don't trust them, that real family wouldn't do this. I nodded, steeling myself against the emotional manipulation I knew was coming. I know, but real family also doesn't steal $17,000 and traumatize their mother with fake stories about debt collectors. As evening approached, Tyler stopped by with one final piece of information. I've been monitoring their social media, he said, almost apologetically. They posted about an hour ago that they're having a last night in paradise dinner at their hotel in Miami. Zoe tagged it #BackToReality tomorrow. Reality indeed. A reality far different from what they were expecting. Before Eleanor left that night, she hugged me tightly. You're doing the right thing, Ash. No matter how hard tomorrow is, remember that you're standing up not just for yourself, but for everyone they might target in the future if they don't face consequences now. Alone in my house, I walked from room to room, touching familiar objects as if to ground myself. The reading lamp Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary, the collection of sea glass we'd gathered on our last vacation together, the small pottery bowl Christopher had made for me in 4th grade art class. So many memories, so many connections. Tomorrow, I would be fighting not just for my financial security, but for my dignity and self-respect, for the recognition that I was not a resource to be exploited, but a person deserving of honesty and respect, even from my own child. I slept fitfully that night, dreams filled with confrontations that went in bizarre directions. Christopher turning into a child again, Zoe transforming into a serpent, myself suddenly unable to speak when I needed to present my case. Morning brought clarity and calm. I woke early, made coffee, and sat in my garden, watching the sunrise paint my roses gold. Whatever happened today would change my relationship with Christopher forever. There would be no going back to blind trust, no pretending this betrayal hadn't occurred. But perhaps, if he showed genuine remorse, if he accepted responsibility and made amends, we could build something new, something based on truth and mutual respect rather than manipulation and exploitation. The possibility, however slim, gave me the strength to face the day ahead. Eleanor called at noon. Their flight took off on time, she reported, still on schedule to land at 5:30. I'll go over around 7:30, I decided. Give them time to get home, unpack, settle in. They'll be tired from traveling, maybe a little less guarded. Perfect, Eleanor agreed. Call me immediately afterward, no matter what time it is. I spent the afternoon reviewing the documents one final time and preparing physically and mentally for the confrontation. I chose my outfit carefully, not my everyday casual clothes, but a blue dress and jacket that made me look pulled together, authoritative. I applied makeup lightly, did my hair, and put on the pearl earrings Robert had given me on our last anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I saw not a victim but a woman of strength and dignity. Whatever happened tonight, I would face it with my head held high. At 6:30, I positioned myself by my living room window with a clear view of their driveway across the street. Eleanor had offered to stay with me, but this vigil felt intensely personal, something I needed to do alone. At 7:15, Christopher's Honda pulled into their driveway. Even from my window, I could see they were both tanned and relaxed, moving with the lazy contentment of people just returned from a luxurious vacation. My vacation. My $17,437. Zoe stretched like a cat in the passenger seat, probably working out the kinks from the long flight. Christopher pulled suitcases from the trunk, both of them laughing at something I couldn't hear. They looked like any other couple returning from a romantic getaway, not thieves who'd spent 2 weeks spending stolen money. I waited exactly 30 minutes before walking across the street and ringing their doorbell, just long enough for them to start unpacking, to relax into the comfortable assumption that they'd gotten away with it. Christopher answered the door, looking genuinely surprised to see me. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I smiled pleasantly, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "I wanted to welcome you home. I said. I've been so worried about Zoe. How is she feeling after her traumatic experience with those debt collectors? For just a moment, confusion flickered across his face. Then I watched realization dawn as he remembered the lie he'd told, the performance he would need to maintain. She's doing much better, he said, recovery impressive in its speed. The time away really helped her recover. I'm so glad to hear that, I replied, my voice steady. May I come in? I brought some photos I thought you might enjoy seeing. Zoe appeared behind Christopher, looking every bit as sun-kissed and relaxed as her social media posts had suggested. Ashley, what a nice surprise. You didn't need to come check on us. Oh, but I did, I said, stepping into their living room uninvited. I have so much to share with you both. The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded, to my ears, like the final locking of a trap. Their trap had been financial deception. Mine was the unassailable power of truth. The time for reckoning had arrived. I stood in Christopher and Zoe's living room, taking in the familiar surroundings that now felt strangely hostile. The oversized leather sofa I'd helped them select when they first moved in. The abstract artwork Zoe had insisted was an investment. The family photos arranged on the mantel, including one of me with Christopher at his college graduation, a moment captured in time when I'd been nothing but proud of the man my son had become. How quickly things could change. Can I get you something to drink? Mom? Christopher asked, sliding easily into the role of solicitous son. Tea wine. No, thank you, I replied, keeping my voice even. I won't be staying long, Zoe gestured toward the sofa. Well, at least sit down, you look tired. I remained standing. I'm not tired, I'm curious. How was the Mediterranean? The question landed like a grenade in their carefully constructed narrative. Christopher froze, his face a mask of barely concealed panic. Zoe, always quicker on her feet, attempted recovery. What are you talking about, Ashley? She asked with a nervous laugh. We went to a wellness retreat in Arizona. For my gambling problem, remember? I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through the screenshots I'd saved from Zoe's Facebook page. A wellness retreat. How interesting, because according to your Facebook posts, you were enjoying a luxury cruise through the Greek islands. I turned the screen toward them, displaying a photo of Zoe posing with a glass of champagne against a backdrop of whitewashed buildings and blue domes. Santorini looks lovely this time of year. I'd planned to see it myself, before I gave you my travel fund to pay off those imaginary gambling debts. Christopher sank onto the sofa, his face ashen. Mom, I can explain. I held up my hand, cutting him off. Oh, I'm sure you can. You're quite talented at explanations, but first, let me share some of my own discoveries. I pulled out the folder I'd brought, removing the credit card statements and bank records I'd organized chronologically. These are records of charges made to my accounts while you were supposedly dealing with Zoe's gambling crisis. Airline tickets, shore excursions, ship Wi-Fi packages, all purchased with my credit card information during the week before you called me about Zoe's life-threatening debt. I laid the documents on their coffee table, one by one. Like playing cards in a particularly devastating game of truth, Christopher couldn't meet my eyes, but Zoe had moved from shock to calculation, her mind visibly racing for a way out of this trap. Ashley, she began, her voice conciliatory. You don't understand the whole situation. Then please, enlighten me, I replied, crossing my arms. Help me understand how stealing $17,437 from your mother-in-law somehow makes sense. The fight went out of Christopher all at once. His shoulders slumped, and he looked like the guilty little boy I remembered from childhood, caught with his hand in the cookie jar. But this wasn't about stolen cookies. This was about stolen dreams, broken trust, and the shattering of our family's foundation. We needed the vacation, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Our marriage was falling apart, and we thought time away might help us reconnect. So you decided I should pay for your marriage counseling cruise. My tone was flat, devoid of the emotion churning beneath the surface. We were going to pay you back, Zoe added quickly, leaning forward with manufactured sincerity. We just needed some time to get our finances sorted out. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. With what money? Christopher, I've seen your credit report. You're maxed out on every card you have. You're behind on your mortgage, your car payment, and apparently your student loans. You can't afford to pay me back because you can't afford anything." Christopher's head snapped up, surprise evident in his expression. "How do you know about our finances?" "I've spent the past week investigating every aspect of your deception," I explained calmly. "James Wilson, Eleanor's neighbor, the retired police officer, has been quite helpful. So has her nephew Daniel, the attorney who specializes in elder financial abuse cases." At the mention of elder financial abuse, something shifted in Zoe's demeanor. The pretense of remorse fell away, replaced by indignation and anger. "You think we don't deserve nice things because we're not perfect with money," she demanded, color rising in her cheeks. "You have more money than you could spend in your lifetime, sitting in your house collecting dust while you obsess over your stupid Italy trip." "Zoe," Christopher warned, but she was past caring about maintaining their facade. "No, Christopher, I'm tired of pretending," she snapped, turning back to me with barely contained fury. "Your mother acts like we're criminals for needing help, but she's the one hoarding money while her own family struggles. She could have paid for that cruise 10 times over without missing a meal." The audacity took my breath away. "Hoarding money I worked for 43 years as a teacher, saved every penny I could, and lived modestly so I could enjoy my retirement. That's not hoarding. That's planning." "And what good did all that planning do you?" Zoe shot back, her voice rising. "You sit in that house by yourself talking to your neighbor about trips you're too scared to actually take. At least we used the money to create memories." "You used stolen money to create memories," I corrected, maintaining my composure despite the rising tension. "And apparently you think that's acceptable because I'm old and alone and couldn't possibly have dreams worth respecting." Christopher finally tried to regain control of the conversation. "Mom, Zoe's upset." "She doesn't mean—" "Oh, I mean every word," Zoe interrupted, standing now, her designer sundress a stark reminder of their expensive tastes. "Your mother guilts you every chance she gets, makes you feel responsible for her loneliness, and then acts like the victim when we finally ask for help. She's been manipulating you for years." The projection was breathtaking. Here was a woman who'd helped steal $17.37 from me, and she was calling me the manipulator. But her outburst was also revealing something I'd suspected but never been able to confirm this hadn't been Christopher's idea originally. "Interesting perspective," I said calmly. "Tell me, Zoe, whose idea was it to use my credit card for the vacation extras?" She glanced at Christopher, realizing too late that she'd said more than she intended. "That's not relevant." "I think it is," I continued, watching their faces carefully. "See, I've been wondering how Christopher got access to my complete financial information. Yes, he helped me organize my accounts after Robert died, but the credit card I use for emergencies was never part of that conversation. That card stayed in my purse, and the only time anyone else handled it was—" I paused, watching understanding dawn on Christopher's face. "Last Christmas, when Zoe offered to help me pay for dinner at that expensive restaurant. She took my card to the register while I was in the bathroom." Christopher looked at his wife with something that might have been surprise or betrayal, hard to tell which. "You photographed my card information," I continued. "Probably front and back, including the security code. That's how you knew my zip code, my full card number, everything you needed to make online purchases." "You can't prove that," Zoe said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Actually, I can," I replied. "I called the credit card company and requested detailed information about where those charges originated. IP addresses, device information, geographical location. Would you like to guess where the airline tickets were purchased?" The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. "From this house," I continued. "On your home computer, Zoe, which means you've been planning this theft for months, waiting for the right opportunity to steal a large amount of money from me." "That's enough," Christopher said quietly. But he wasn't talking to me. He was looking at Zoe with an expression I'd never seen before. Not angry exactly, but calculating, as if he was finally seeing his wife clearly for the first time. Zoe must have heard something dangerous in his voice because her attitude shifted abruptly. "Christopher, honey, don't let her turn us against each other. We're a team. Remember, it's us against the world. Is it Christopher asked, his voice strained. Because right now it feels like you used me to steal from my mother, and you're expecting me to cover for you. The dynamic in the room was changing in real time. Zoe had overplayed her hand, revealed too much about her role in planning the theft. Christopher might be a liar and a thief, but he was also realizing he'd been manipulated by his wife just as thoroughly as I had. You planned this, he said to Zoe, his voice gaining strength. The gambling debt story, using Mom's card, all of it. This wasn't a desperate mistake. It was a calculated con. Don't be ridiculous. Zoe tried to laugh it off. We planned it together. No, we didn't, Christopher countered, his face hardening. I wanted to ask Mom for a loan for the cruise. You said she'd never agree to pay for something that expensive, that we needed a better story. You came up with the gambling debt idea. I watched my son piece together his wife's manipulation with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because Zoe was finally being exposed for what she was. Sadness because Christopher was realizing his marriage might be built on lies just as elaborate as the ones they'd told me. But none of this absolved him of his choices. He might have been manipulated by his wife, but he'd still looked me in the eye and lied. He'd still terrorized me with fake stories about Zoe's safety. He'd still chosen his wife's schemes over his mother's trust. The good news, I said, pulling out the manila folder I'd been saving for this moment, is that I've already taken care of everything. Christopher and Zoe exchanged glances, probably wondering if I meant I'd forgiven them or called the police. The truth was more elegant than either option. You see, when I discovered your theft, I had a choice. I explained, my voice steady. I could report you to the authorities, which would likely result in criminal charges and definitely destroy what's left of our family relationship. Or I could handle this privately in a way that ensures you never steal from me again, while also protecting Christopher from the worst consequences of his poor judgment. I opened the folder and spread its contents across their coffee table bank statements, legal documents, correspondence with credit card companies, and most importantly, a detailed accounting of every dollar they'd stolen. $17,437, I said. That's the total amount you took from me, including the cruise cost, credit card charges, and the fraudulent gambling transactions you used to create your false narrative. Zoe leaned forward to examine the documents, her face growing paler with each page she scanned. What is all this evidence? I replied simply. Documentation, a complete paper trail of your theft with timestamps, IP addresses, and bank records that prove exactly what you did and when you did it. I've been quite thorough. Mom, Christopher started, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished, I said firmly. As I mentioned, I had a choice about how to handle this, and I chose the option that protects my interests while giving you both a chance to avoid criminal prosecution. I pulled out the final document, the legally binding promissory note that Daniel had drafted. This is a promissory note for the full amount you stole, plus interest, to be repaid over the next 2 years. The payments are calculated based on Christopher's current salary, so I know they're manageable if you adjust your lifestyle accordingly. Christopher picked up the promissory note, scanning its terms with growing alarm. 2 years, Mom. These payments are huge. We'll have to cut everything. Yes, you will. I agreed without sympathy. No more expensive dinners, no more shopping sprees, no more vacations you can't afford. You'll live like the working class people you actually are instead of the wealthy couple you've been pretending to be with my money. And if we refuse to sign, Zoe asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer, then I file a police report tomorrow morning, I said simply. Credit card fraud, elder financial abuse, theft by deception. Daniel assures me that with this level of documentation, prosecution would be straightforward. You'd likely face felony charges. Christopher would lose his job, and you'd both have criminal records that would follow you for the rest of your lives. The room fell silent except for the ticking of their mantel clock. I could see them weighing their options, calculating whether they could somehow talk their way out of this or find an alternative that didn't involve consequences. There's one more thing, I added. The promissory note includes a provision that if you miss even one payment, the entire balance becomes due immediately, and I'm free to pursue criminal charges retroactively. So this isn't just about paying me back. It's about proving you've learned to live within your means. Zoe was reading over Christopher's shoulder now, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. This is vindictive. Ashley, you're destroying our quality of life over money you don't even need. I'm protecting myself from future theft, I corrected, and teaching you both that actions have consequences. You chose to steal from me, so now you get to live with the results of that choice. We could fight this, Zoe said, a desperate edge to her voice. Claim you gave us the money willingly. You could try, I agreed. But you'd have to explain the credit card fraud, the forged gambling transactions, and the elaborate lies about debt collectors. Plus, I have recordings of some very interesting conversations. That wasn't entirely true, but their guilty expressions suggested they weren't sure what conversations I might have documented. Let them worry about it. Christopher set down the promissory note and looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years: respect. Not affection, not gratitude, but the acknowledgement that I was someone to be taken seriously. You've thought of everything, he said quietly. I've learned to protect myself, I replied. Something I should have done years ago. Zoe was still trying to find an angle, some way to negotiate better terms. What about the cruise? We can't undo that. Shouldn't we get some credit for money that's already spent? I laughed. You want credit for memories you created with stolen money? No. Zoe, you pay for every penny you stole, and every time you look at those vacation photos, you'll remember exactly what they cost our family. Christopher's expression was somber now, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. What happens after we pay you back? Do we have a relationship anymore? Or is this just business? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be honest and kind, who'd chosen to become a liar and a thief, the boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers, the teenager who'd promised to take care of me when I got old, the adult who'd stolen my dreams to fund his wife's fantasies. That depends, I said finally, on whether you prove you're capable of being the man I tried to raise you to be. But neither of us was prepared for what Zoe said next. Fine, she snapped, her voice sharp as broken glass. We'll sign your precious contract and pay back every penny, but don't pretend this makes you the victim. Ashley, you want to know the truth. We've been supporting you emotionally for years while you drained us financially. Christopher looked at his wife like she'd lost her mind. Zoe, what are you talking about? Your mother, she continued, turning to face me directly, has been guilt-tripping you about money and attention for years. Every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering. It's been about how lonely she is, how worried she is about her finances, how she sacrifices for everyone else. She trained you to feel responsible for her happiness, then acts shocked when we actually need help. The lies were breathtaking in their audacity. I've never asked Christopher for financial support, I said evenly. No, you just make comments about how expensive things are, how fixed incomes don't stretch, how you don't know how you'll afford home repairs. You manipulate through martyrdom, then play innocent when people respond to your hints. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. These weren't random accusations. Zoe was describing specific conversations, private moments between me and Christopher that I'd thought were normal mother-son exchanges about life's challenges. You've been telling her about our private conversations, I said to Christopher. He had the grace to look ashamed. She's my wife. Mom. We talk about everything. Everything, Zoe emphasized, gaining momentum. Including how your mother mentions needing a new roof or worrying about property taxes or wondering how she'll afford to maintain that big house by herself. You share all of it with me, and then you feel guilty because you can't afford to help her with every little problem. That's not manipulation, I protested. That's normal conversation between family members. Is it? Zoe pulled out her phone and started scrolling. Christopher, remember what you told me after Thanksgiving about how guilty you felt because your mom mentioned the heating bill being higher than expected? Christopher's face flushed. Zoe, don't. Or what about when she mentioned that cruise prices had gone up, and she might have to wait another year for Italy? You felt terrible because you knew she'd been saving forever, but you also knew we couldn't afford to give her thousands of dollars. I stared at my son, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. You felt obligated to help me afford Italy. You seemed so disappointed, Christopher said quietly. You'd worked so hard to save for that trip, and then prices increased right when you were ready to book. You didn't ask for money directly, but you heard it as a request for help, I finished. And when you couldn't afford to help, you felt guilty. So when the opportunity came up to borrow the money temporarily, Zoe continued, it felt like we were solving your problem and ours at the same time. You'd get your Italy trip eventually, and we'd get the vacation our marriage needed. The reinterpretation of events was masterful and completely wrong, but I could see how it might have worked on Christopher's conscience. Zoe had taken his genuine love for me and twisted it into something that justified theft. She'd made him believe that stealing my money was actually a favor to me. Except you weren't borrowing, I pointed out. You were stealing, and you had no intention of telling me the truth or paying me back. We would have paid you back, Christopher insisted. Eventually. With what money? I asked again. You're barely making your current bills. That's when Zoe played her final card. With the money we'll inherit when you die. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Christopher went white, staring at his wife like she'd revealed herself to be a stranger. I felt something inside me go very still and very cold. Excuse me. Come on, Ashley. You're 67 years old. Statistically, you have maybe 15 years left. That house, your savings, your retirement accounts, it's all going to Christopher anyway. We were just accelerating the timeline a little bit. Zoe, Christopher whispered, horror evident in his voice. But she was beyond stopping now. Your money is going to be ours eventually. So what's the difference if we use some of it now when we actually need it? At least this way. We get to enjoy it together instead of waiting for you to die first. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat, the hum of their refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic outside. But inside the room, nothing moved except the slow destruction of whatever relationship we'd had left. Christopher was staring at Zoe like he was seeing her for the first time. You planned this based on inheriting Mom's money when she dies. I planned this based on reality, Zoe shot back. Your mother isn't going to live forever, and when she's gone, we'll need that money for our own retirement. I just suggested we treat it like an advance on our inheritance. An advance you decided to take without asking, I said, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. Would you have said yes if we'd asked? Zoe demanded. Absolutely not. Exactly, she said triumphantly. So we took what we needed and planned to replace it before you noticed. If you hadn't been so obsessive about checking your accounts, this never would have been a problem. I looked at this woman my son had married, this person who'd helped steal my money while justifying it as advanced payment on my death, and I realized I'd been far too generous in my punishment. Zoe, I said quietly, you've just made a very expensive mistake. I set down the promissory note and pulled out a different document from my folder. I'm afraid there's been a change in plans. Christopher and Zoe both leaned forward, sensing that whatever came next was going to be worse than what they'd expected. You see, Zoe, when you mentioned inheriting my money, you revealed something crucial about your motivation for this theft. You didn't steal from me because you were desperate or made a poor decision in a moment of crisis. You stole from me because you consider my assets to be yours by right, just not available on your preferred timeline. I unfolded the new document and placed it on their coffee table. This is a revised version of my will, drafted yesterday after I spoke with Daniel about our situation. Christopher's face went ashen. Mom, what did you do? I protected my assets from future theft, I explained calmly. The original will left everything to you, Christopher, because I believed you were an honest man who would honor my memory by using that inheritance responsibly. Recent events have proven that assumption incorrect. Zoe snatched up the will, her eyes scanning frantically for her name. When she didn't find it, she looked for Christopher's. The longer she read, the more her face twisted with rage. You can't do this, she said finally. You can't leave everything to charity out of spite. I'm not leaving everything to charity, I corrected. I'm establishing a trust fund for my future grandchildren's education, managed by independent trustees who will ensure the money is used for legitimate educational expenses. Christopher will receive a modest inheritance, enough to be meaningful, but not enough to fund a lifestyle he can't afford on his own. Christopher was reading over Zoe's shoulder now, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and what might have been relief. "How much is modest $50,000? I replied. "The rest, approximately $400,000 in assets, will fund college educations for your children and any future grandchildren I might have." Zoe threw the will down like it was contaminated. "This is insane. We're your family. We're the ones who'll take care of you when you're old and sick." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow. "Based on what evidence you've already shown me exactly how you'll take care of me when you need money for vacations you can't afford." "That's different," Christopher said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Is it Zoe just told me she considers my money to be advanced payment on my death? She's literally counting on me dying so she can spend my life savings. How is that different from elder abuse?" The question hung between us while they processed the implications. I'd spent 3 days thinking about Zoe's revelation, and every angle I examined led to the same conclusion: they would absolutely steal from me again, probably in increasing amounts as they got older and more desperate. "This isn't fair," Zoe said, tears of frustration gathering in her eyes. "We made one mistake." "You made a series of calculated decisions over several months," I corrected. "You studied my financial habits, stole my credit card information, created fake gambling transactions to support your lies, traumatized me with stories about threats to your safety, and then spent my money while documenting your theft on social media. That's not one mistake. Zoe, that's a criminal enterprise." Christopher finally found his voice. "What about the promissory note? Do we still have to pay you back?" "Oh, absolutely," I nodded. "That debt doesn't disappear just because your inheritance does. You still owe me $17,437 plus interest, to be paid over 2 years as outlined in the agreement. So we pay you back money that won't even come to us when you die anyway," Zoe said, her voice reaching dangerous heights. "That's correct," I confirmed. "You pay me back money you stole because theft has consequences, regardless of your future expectations." I stood up, gathering my documents with the satisfaction of someone who'd just checkmated an opponent. "I'll give you both 24 hours to decide whether you want to sign the promissory note or face criminal charges. But either way, my will stands as written." "This is vindictive," Zoe spat. "You're punishing us for being honest about the inheritance." "I'm protecting my assets from people who've proven they can't be trusted with them," I replied calmly. "The children will get good educations, which is exactly what I would have wanted my money to accomplish." Christopher walked me to the door, his face a mixture of resignation and something that might have been respect. "I guess I deserve this," he said quietly. "You deserve consequences for your choices," I agreed. "What you do with those consequences is up to you." As I walked back to my house, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not happy, exactly. It's hard to be truly happy when your relationship with your only child has been permanently damaged, but satisfied in a way that felt solid and final. Eleanor was waiting in my kitchen with a bottle of wine and a knowing smile. "How did it go?" "Better than expected," I replied, settling at the table. Zoe revealed more than she intended. Christopher finally saw who he married, and the will is changed. Any future grandchildren will get educations instead of enabling their parents' poor judgment. Eleanor raised her glass. "To consequences." "To consequences," I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. "And to new beginnings," I added silently. Because that's what this was, wasn't it? Not just the end of a relationship based on exploitation, but the beginning of one built on truth, however painful that truth might be. 3 months later, I was sipping wine on a terrace in Tuscany, watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and amber. I'd rebooked my Italy trip using money from the first payment on Christopher and Zoe's promissory note. There was a certain poetic justice in funding my dream vacation with money they were paying back for trying to steal that same dream. The weeks following our confrontation had been turbulent, true to form. Zoe had tried to fight the promissory note, claiming emotional duress and threatening to countersue me for defamation. But faced with the mountain of evidence I'd gathered and the very real possibility of criminal charges, she'd eventually capitulated. Christopher, to my surprise, had been the one to insist they follow through on the agreement. "We took the money," he'd told Zoe during a heated phone call I overheard. "We're paying it back. End of discussion." The payments had arrived on time each month, accompanied by terse notes from Christopher confirming the amount and remaining balance. No apologies, no personal messages, just business. I understood. Some wounds were too deep for casual conversation to bridge. My phone buzzed with a text message. I expected it to be Eleanor, checking on my trip, but instead found Christopher's name on the screen. "Mom, I signed the divorce papers today. I'm sorry for everything. Maybe when I finish paying you back, we can try to rebuild our relationship." I stared at the message for a long moment, absorbing its implications. So Christopher had finally found the courage to leave Zoe. I wasn't entirely surprised. The foundation of their marriage had been cracked long before I discovered their theft, and my confrontation had merely widened those fissures into chasms. I typed back, "I'm sorry about your marriage. Enjoy your fresh start. Some relationships can't be rebuilt, but some people can learn to be better than they were. I'm curious to see which category you'll choose." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was an opening, a small window through which reconciliation might eventually be possible. If Christopher was willing to earn back my trust through actions, not just words, perhaps we could salvage something from the wreckage of our relationship. The waiter brought my dinner, handmade pasta with truffles that cost more than Zoe probably spent on groceries in a week. As I ate, I thought about the woman I'd been 3 months ago. Lonely, trusting, eager to be needed, even by people who didn't deserve my generosity. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's enablement. I'd finally learned the difference between being a good mother and being a doormat. After dinner, I wandered through the ancient streets of the small Tuscan village where I was staying. The stones beneath my feet had witnessed centuries of human dramas: love, betrayal, reconciliation, loss. My small family saga was just one more ripple in that vast ocean of human experience. I'd come to Italy seeking adventure and renewal, and I'd found both, though not in the way I'd expected. The journey that had brought me to this moment had been painful, but necessary. I was stronger now, wiser, less willing to sacrifice my own needs and dreams for people who saw me only as a resource to be exploited. Back in my charming hotel room, I pulled out my journal and wrote a letter to Robert, as I often did when processing difficult emotions. "My darling," I wrote, "you would hardly recognize me now. Remember how you always said I was too trusting, too willing to see the best in people even when evidence suggested otherwise. You were right, of course, but I think you'd be proud of how I've finally learned to stand up for myself, to demand respect even from those I love most. Christopher isn't the man we raised him to be, at least, not yet, but there's hope. Without Zoe's influence, perhaps he can find his way back to the values we tried to instill in him. And if not, I'll be okay. More than okay. I'll be living my life fully, honoring your memory by embracing every adventure that comes my way. The Italy you and I dreamed of is every bit as beautiful as we imagined. The light here has a quality I can't describe. Golden, luminous, almost tangible. I wish you could see it with me. Feel the warmth of the sun on these ancient stones. Taste the wine that seems to capture sunshine in liquid form. But in a way, you're here, in my heart, in my memories, in the strength you helped me discover in myself. I carry you with me, always." I closed the journal, wiped away a tear, and opened the window to let in the night air, fragrant with jasmine and history. The Italian sunset had been worth waiting 67 years to see. Some things were worth the wait, especially when you got to enjoy them with money that was rightfully yours all along. The next day would bring Florence and its artistic treasures. The day after, Venice and its mysterious waterways. I had 3 weeks of discovery ahead of me, and I intended to savor every moment. My phone buzzed again, another text from Christopher. "I found an apartment, smaller than what I'm used to, but it's all I need. Started therapy last week. The therapist says I have a lot to unpack about my relationship with money and with you. I'd like to talk when you get back, if you're willing." Progress. Small but significant. I replied, I'll be back October 3rd. We can talk then. Enjoy your new space. Sometimes smaller is better. Fewer distractions from what really matters. I set the phone aside and turned my attention back to the Tuscan landscape spread before me. The rolling hills, the cypress trees standing like exclamation points against the sky, the ancient farmhouses that had witnessed centuries of human drama. All of it was mine to explore and enjoy. The Italian sunset was worth waiting 67 years to see. Some things are worth the wait, especially when you get to enjoy them with money that was rightfully yours all along. I raised my glass to the sunset, to fresh starts, and to the beautiful truth that it's never too late to stop letting people take advantage of your kindness. The view from the other side of betrayal, I discovered, was absolutely spectacular. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and don't forget to share where you're watching from. Before you go, check out 2 other stories that are channel favorites. My daughter-in-law banned me from seeing my grandkids until I checked my bank account, and after 40 years my husband left me for his secretary, then begged to come back when he saw my transformation.